The game formerly known as Gods and Monsters, currently and now forever known as Immortals Fenyx Rising, is about to come out, and I have spent the last few days playing through it on PlayStation 5, and today I'm here to talk about the game and my full thoughts now that I have completed it. I just want to say up front though that I really wish this game would have kept the name Gods and Monsters. I've grown to accept Immortals Fenyx Rising as a name, right? I mean, it's what the game's called. We gotta accept it and just keep going with that. But Gods and Monsters was such a fantastic name, and I feel like it fits the game so well. I don't know why they changed it, and I secretly wish they hadn't. But outside of that, let's talk about what the game is, who it's for, and what I think about it. Immortals Fenyx Rising is an action-adventure game developed by Ubisoft Quebec. The last game they made was Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and a lot of that game's DNA carries over to Immortals Fenyx Rising, especially in the combat. The combat feels pretty similar for me, and we'll talk about combat a little bit later. But in this game, you explore a really fun story, frankly, centered around Greek mythology and a colorful and vibrant cast of characters that get into all types of fun shenanigans. This game doesn't take itself too seriously, which is something I enjoyed a lot. Maybe that won't be for everybody. I have seen previews say that maybe the game is a little too kooky, maybe there's like a little bit too much dialogue, the characters are a little too zany and wacky. Those are complaints that I've seen out there for preview coverage, but for me, I honestly found it a little bit refreshing that we got something that's like way more lighthearted. Ubisoft kind of does a lot of stuff that is a part of a giant series, right? We have like 20 Assassin's Creed games. We just got Watch Dogs Legions, which, there hasn't been a ton of Watch Dogs games, but we've had that formula before, and seeing them tackle on something like this was really great because obviously, and I'm going to try my best to not compare it to Breath of the Wild so much during this video because I feel like this game does stand on its own, and while structurally there are a lot of similarities, and we'll get into some of those, this does enough to differentiate itself and separate itself completely from what Breath of the Wild did. Given the fact that we get huge apocalyptic end of the world situations where the game is really dark and the main character is brooding, like I said, found it refreshing that isn't the vibe here whatsoever. I kind of equate this a little bit to a Pixar movie, right? That's just visually what it looks like a little bit, and aside from that, there's a moral to the story, much like in Pixar movies. If you mix what Pixar does a little bit with Assassin's Creed and Breath of the Wild and some Greek mythology, this is kind of what you get. It's a perfect amalgamation of all of those things. Now, I know Pixar is amazing at what they do. I'm not trying to say that the story or the characters here are anywhere near that level, but there were a few times when playing through the game, I did stop and think hey, this is Pixar-esque. And I don't know if they were actually trying to make that a thing, but for me at least, I feel like there were some very clear inspirations there. If we were to nitpick, I guess that one of the things that we could really criticize is that maybe Immortals doesn't do enough to change the open box, I guess, because it's an open world game like a lot of other open world games are, and it falls into a lot of the same trappings, and I feel like side quests and things are a little bit better here, but hey, it's still an open world game, and a lot of the formulas that go into making those games something you want to explore for hours and hours and hours, they do that here too. So at the end of the day, Immortals Fenyx Rising, it's still just an open world action adventure game, but it happens to have a fun cast of characters and a cool story to go along with it, with some lighthearted action that we maybe haven't seen in gaming too much lately, although shout out to Bugsnax, I do want to mention that. I'm talking about what the game is, but I do want to say one thing it is not, and that is a Zelda clone. It is not a Breath of the Wild clone, and while the inspiration is there, it 100% is. This isn't a clone because this builds on that and does a lot of things better. And one of the things that it does do better is story, so let's go ahead and get into that. I love the way the story is handled in Immortals. It is being told by Prometheus to Zeus, and that's just kind of how the narration happens. There are a lot of moments where the fourth wall is being broken, where Prometheus is telling Zeus exactly what's happening, and then Zeus will just make a funny wisecrack about it all. Some of the jokes for whatever reason landed so hard with me. And you're not going to just be constantly laughing at the game or anything like that, but some of the things were so witty and so clever and also so simple at the exact same time that they really just struck a chord. And the progression of Fenyx, who is just a regular soldier that gets stranded because there's this accident. You figure out that your brother and, you know, all your friends, I guess, are turned into stone. You gotta figure out how to save everybody, and then from there it just kind of snowballs into a big epic adventure. Prophecies are fulfilled and a colorful cast is introduced. Hermes, being one of my favorites, he is the first NPC you meet, and he gives you the task of going to save all the other gods who have been cursed in some way or another. One might be turned into a little girl, one might be turned into a robot with like no memory of what is going on. Ares, for example, was turned into a cowardly chicken, when we all know that Ares is the god of war. He is anything but a coward, and the way that they play from what these characters are traditionally in Greek mythology kind of flip it on its head a little bit. I really appreciated that. It has a little bit of a Wizard of Oz type feel to it at times, where a lot of these gods are trying to grow and learn, and maybe they're missing a little something, and I felt like Fenyx is Dorothy just trying to make everybody whole again. Seeing Fenyx grow and rise, no pun intended, or maybe a little bit of a pun intended there, but regardless, seeing the change from Fenyx just being this like normal mortal that is just trying to do her best or his best. You can play as a male or a female. There is character customization. It's kind of limited. I just went with the default female look for mine just because I liked it. But again, seeing how the characters grow and having them learn from lessons, it was all kind of cool. At times it felt like a little bit like a Saturday morning cartoon where you are watching something that's like entertaining, but it's also kind of just like teaching you something at the exact same time. I feel like this would be a really fun game for a younger audience. And they do lean into that because visually it is very vibrant, very colorful, very beautiful a lot of the times. Now, story alone does not make a game. If that were the case, we'd go watch a movie or something. So it's time to talk about probably the most important thing, and that is gameplay. And we are going to loop in gameplay and accessibility into one. I want to talk about the accessibility very briefly because there isn't like a ton of options, but one thing that is very important, and I'm happy that it is included, is a colorblind mode. I mentioned that the game is vibrant. I mentioned that it is very colorful, and I know some people that are colorblind and they always appreciate it when developers include a colorblind mode, and I feel like that's really well served for the people that need it. I'm happy to report that it is here. You don't have to worry about that whatsoever. Now let's just talk about the gameplay. While we compare the game to Zelda, right? We've been doing that, so let's continue here. This is completely different combat. You have way more upgrades and abilities as you go along. Of course, the runes are pretty iconic now, at least for me, and you don't have as many of those type of powers. You do have one power that lets you just carry objects, you know, very similar to what Breath of the Wild does, but that's about where it stops. Here you have some limited combo upgrades, maneuverability upgrades, and the moment-to-moment gameplay reminded me way more of the more modern Assassin's Creed games than anything Zelda has ever done. Of course, there are certain similarities. If you get out of the way right at the nick of time, everything slows down, kind of like a Fury attack, but that's been done before in the past, so we don't want to credit that entirely to Zelda. And I found myself having way more fun with the game the more abilities I unlocked. At the beginning you just have a couple, but once you are able to get really deep with the combat, I even got up to like a 100 hit combo a couple times. There is a combo counter, and there's even a perk that you unlock at one point that the higher your counter goes, and it goes in giant increments, you do more damage, and that served me tremendously in some of the later boss fights. I love that aspect of it. So while it's not crazy deep, this isn't a really hardcore numbers based RPG or anything like that. In fact, a lot of the leveling up is kind of done for all weapons. If you upgrade your swords, all your swords get upgraded, and the only differences between the swords are visuals and a perk that they add. Same with your axe, and that's pretty much how it goes. There is no hardcore deep RPG mechanics. I do want to make that known, but I feel like maybe a lot of people probably aren't even expecting this. One of the things that I will say is that there's not a ton of incentive to fight enemies unless you are, going for a chest that they're guarding or anything like that. But if you're just galloping around from one point of the map to the other and you see a group of enemies, sometimes it's best just to completely avoid them because there's no XP or anything like that. There isn't like leveling up in that traditional sense. So I did find that I would avoid fights a lot of times just because there was no real reason to. It kind of wasted time and it often sidetracked me unnecessarily. That isn't to say that the combat isn't fun. I just don't see a point in doing it when you're not rewarded for it very much. And frankly, I see no point in being sidetracked so much when you can just get to where you're trying to go anyways, and there's probably going to be a battle there waiting for you. Anyway, there were a couple of side bosses and bosses that were actually difficult. There are difficulty settings, and I was playing on normal, and for the most part, I was okay with it. Some bosses were genuinely difficult. I do want to be open about the fact that I would roam to areas of the map that maybe I shouldn't have right away just because I hadn't like leveled up any of my weapons or anything. The last thing I want to talk about gameplay wise is the puzzles, because I think that they are a little bit of a mixed bag. Some are just downright genius and I love it. Some that are just like side stuff, because this is an open world game. It does throw seemingly endless tasks at you if you feel like doing them. They're all optional, but some of those are puzzles, and those are a little bit more simple, and they get repetitive if you are out there trying to collect absolutely everything. Pushing blocks to get them in the correct order, running from point A to point B within a certain time limit, shooting your guided arrow through multiple rings. Those are all cool and fun in the beginning, but once you've done each of them about 6, 7, 8, or even more times, you kind of just figure that like, hey, I've seen that. Maybe I don't want to stop at every single location that I see and do these smaller tasks. The big puzzles though, and there are traditional dungeons here like you expect in the game that we keep talking about, and Darksiders. I want to mention Darksiders 1. A lot of the puzzles here reminded me of that, and I love the puzzles in the original Darksiders. Darksiders 2, not so much. Darksiders 3, I don't even talk about. But if you were a fan of the structure of the puzzles for the original Darksiders, there is a lot of similarities here, and I love them. Some of them are ingenious, some of them are difficult, and some of these dungeons take up to an hour to complete. They are so intricate and they have so many layers to them. I thought that they were really well done. I'm going to be honest and say that the puzzles were probably my favorite part of the game. If you are a fan of more traditional Zelda puzzles, then this one is going to provide you a lot of happiness in certain sections. Alright, now let's talk about the performance and how the game runs. As I said in the beginning, I played the game on PlayStation 5. The game has two modes. You can play a performance mode where the game focuses on hitting 60 FPS consistently, or you can play a quality mode where that isn't the priority and the game prioritizes resolution and having everything look way prettier. I appreciate this in video games. It's damn near my favorite part of the new generation. I have been a PC player for a long time, and having these options is just mwah. I absolutely love it. I feel like every game needs to do this. Miles Morales on PlayStation 5 did it beautifully, and now Immortals Fenyx Rising just keeps it going. It's fantastic. I had no real issues visually. I didn't see any frame drops. I was personally playing in the performance mode where I was getting 60 FPS. I feel like the game is pretty enough that I could do without some of the higher resolution textures and things like that, and then just be able to keep that steady frame rate. That's just the way I prefer to play games. There were a couple of bugs here and there, but I could probably count them on one hand. It is an open world Ubisoft game, so bugs were bound to be a thing. I guess the more annoying one for me happened kind of towards the end, where I had this audio glitch where it just sounded like super crackly, and some of the cutscenes even like just like cut out. Like the dialogue would completely drop for, a second, and then it'd come right back, and then it would drop for a second. That one audio bug was the only issue I had. I didn't have any crashes. I know that some of these open world Ubisoft games tend to crash a lot. I didn't experience that whatsoever. So this one really pleased me, because playing through Valhalla, for me, that was a buggy mess. I played Valhalla on PlayStation 4, and I had maybe like 5 or 6 crashes where like I just had to completely shut everything down, reboot the PlayStation, and maybe that speaks to the PS4 that I have being a little bit older and the PlayStation 5 is brand new. Who knows? But I had very few performance hiccups whatsoever. It's just the audio one that was a little bit annoying. Now I want to get into the replay value. Once you beat the game, you do have New Game Plus. Alternatively, if you haven't done absolutely everything, it gives you a save state right before you get into like the final dungeon, and you can go back and complete whatever side quests you have open and collect whatever armor, whatever weapons. There is a ton of fun to be had even after you finish the game. New Game Plus is something that I might dive into for a little while. I don't foresee me beating the game a second time or anything. It is a very busy time of the year for me, but I like that it gives you the option. Good replay value. I finished the story in just over 22 hours. I did a decent amount of side stuff. It is a sizable story. It's not short whatsoever. I personally love the length. I am not a fan of 60, 70, 80 hour open world games that are structured like this. That's just kind of not my thing. I know a lot of people put 100 hours into Breath of the Wild. I know a lot of people put 100 hours into Assassin's Creed Valhalla or Odyssey or whatever it may be, but that's just not how I do things. I want to experience everything the world gives me a few times, right? Like, let me do all the side quests and let me do some of those side tasks maybe like 3-4 times, and then after that I've seen it. I don't need to keep doing it. I used to be a completionist, but yeah, those days are long gone. But that stuff is available for those of you that still choose to play that way. You could probably dump a good 50-60 hours into this to do everything. And that brings me to this final portion where I would like normally give a rating, and maybe I still will. Stay tuned for that here in the video. But I want to recommend that you guys absolutely go get Immortals Fenyx Rising. I think it is a phenomenal game. I fear that it might go on sale pretty quickly because we just recently saw Watch Dogs Legion be $30, right? That's half price already, and it didn't come out that long ago. So I fear that this game is destined for the same fate, but this deserves so much more. If this interests you whatsoever, pick it up at full price. They deserve it. To have a new IP, and yes, it's a new IP that kind of copies other games, like I get it, but hey, no idea is original. There's nothing new under the sun. It's not what you do, but how it's done. And that's the Nas line for anybody here that likes music the way I do. But this was one of the more fun games I played this year. I cannot think of anything that tops the fun factor I had with this. I laughed at the story. I grew to like the characters. It was even touching in some moments. The gameplay was really, really fun. The customization and RPG elements weren't very deep, but I wasn't expecting that going in. And this is probably going to be one of the more underrated games of the year, at least for me. I think that this game deserves way more attention than it's getting, and I loved most of my playtime with it. A couple of bugs here and there was not enough to make me not enjoy it, and those bugs kind of just went away rather quickly. Anyways, some fun boss fights, a cool world, fun characters. What more do you want in a video game, especially right now where everything is so dark and brooding? Even the real world right now, there's a lot of negativity out there. So seeing a game like this come along, it gets my full 2 thumbs up. I know people like hearing like out of 10 ratings. I'm like at a real high 8, like I don't know, like 8.8, almost a 9. I want to say a 9, but some of those puzzles getting so repetitive really like bugged me. Those puzzles I was not a fan of, and the story wasn't anything earth-shattering or anything like that. So those are the only real nitpicks I have about it, other than the fact that yeah, it takes away from a lot of other games and kind of does it better in certain ways. But there you have it. That is my review for Immortals. I was going to call it Immortals, Gods, and Monsters. No, it is called Immortals Fenyx Rising. Thank you guys for watching. I know this is a little bit of a longer video, but I wanted to get in depth for those of you that appreciate it. And to those of you who have been thinking about getting this game, do it. Don't hesitate. I fully recommend it. Pay the full price if you can. Like, I know we all want to pay less for games, but I also think it's important to celebrate and reward good work, and they knocked it out of the park. I love Immortals Fenyx Rising, one of my favorite games of the year. I would not have expected that going in, but it blew me away. It did. So there you guys have it. Thank you for watching. Hit the thumbs up if you enjoyed the video. Rate it even if you didn't enjoy it. Just give me a rating. And subscribe if you're not already subscribed. I stream every Monday, Thursday, and Friday over on Twitch. I should have done this in the beginning, but I kind of just wanted to get into the video and save all the stuff for the end. I appreciate you guys. I love you guys, and I'll see you guys soon. Thank you so much. Goodbye.